They've
Ball
got
taken
it.
away, and a great job by Tajon Lucas, and the throwdown for the...
Trying to clear out here, and Samuels gets to his left.
Don't let what you can't do interfere with what you can do. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Athlete Podcast sponsored by Sports for Champions. Today I'm delighted to be joined by professional basketball player Corey Samuels. How's today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, you know. It's really good to be here, meet the guys, and yeah, really exciting for the future.
Oh, it's really exciting. Thanks so much for joining us. We like to start these podcasts at the very beginning. Can you tell us about how you first got into basketball?
Yeah, so everyone kind of laughs when I tell them, like, the first kind of intro to the sport was watching Like Mike, which is, if you don't know who Bow Wow is, if you're too young, go back and watch that movie, because that one, I can't lie, it was crazy. As a 5-year-old watching that, and then I guess what kind of carried that interest forward was just watching my brother. He started playing basketball at a leisure centre in Bristol, and as all younger brothers do, they want to be like their big brother, so that kind of really encouraged me to get into the sport as well.
Were you competitive between the two of you?
Oh yeah, definitely. There was a lot of 1v1s in the back garden and at the park back in the day. I don't think I beat in 1v1 till I was about 15 maybe. I got a couple of games of him, but
really?
It made me better though. So it was
Did you have
worth
to take a stretch before you were kind of able to get around him, over him?
I don't know what I did on that day, but it worked. Whatever I did, it worked.
And I believe you were into gymnastics in your sort of early years. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so that was kind of like a filler period for me, because I was so young. Like when my brother started, I couldn't join at the same time as him. I think I had to wait till I was about 5 to get going. So my parents knew I was quite an active kid and wanted to be doing something, so got into gymnastics, and that was actually really fun. Looking back, I don't know if I was quite doing backflips at 4 or 5 years old, but whatever I was doing, I was enjoying, and yeah.
You see a lot of people like they're doing different sports in their early career. You see people who do things like ballet end up being really good at boxing. Do you feel like that kind of, I don't know, like the plyometric side of gymnastics helped in any way with the basketball? Yeah,
I just think, especially at that age, doing something like gymnastics kind of helps you get used to your body, kind of helps with the gross motor skills, and in a different way to a lot of other kids, especially, I guess a lot of basketball players start around like 10 or 12. So I kind of had gymnastics at an early age to get me ready to kind of get ahead of like some of the other 6-7-year-olds. And I guess that kind of like carried forwards.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think most kids are just like messing about in a sandpit or something, doing something for your body, like learning to balance and stuff. It can only have helped.
Yeah.
And then do you remember your first time where you were able to actually go down and get involved at the club?
Yeah, and I just remember all the other kids were just huge. Like they just seemed massive to me. But it didn't really stop me. I just kind of had like a fighter's mentality, just got after it. And yeah, it was a pretty cool experience.
What kind of position were you playing in your early days?
Well, I guess it was positionless basketball, because it was just a bunch of kids running around with a ball. I guess it was quite unorganized. But then, like as I kind of came to the club I'm at now, so Bristol Flyers, when I started at that club, I was just always in at the point guard spot, just because I was always the smallest on the team.
There you go. Can you tell us a bit about that position, about what it takes to do well in it?
Yeah, so I think it's like pretty much consensus, like it's the most responsibility is like assigned to the point guard. You often hear like people calling point guards the on-court coach, or like an extension of the coach on the court. The main primary role is to kind of run the team, run the offense, make sure that everything's in line. If the game kind of goes away from us and is kind of going a bad direction, like it's the point guard you kind of look at first. So I take that responsibility with like, you know, I take it seriously.
So is that like a lot of the plays going through you? Are you controlling like the tempo of the match, and like if you think you need to speed up, or if you think you need to slow things down? Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all of the play calls like come from me, obviously. If a teammate has an idea for a play, I'm not going to shut him down, but it's my responsibility to like know what we're running next and keep like kind of make sure I'm on the same page as my coach, so that like everything just goes smoothly pretty much.
So you're quite a young player. It's quite a lot of responsibility. Is there anything about you, do you think, that's made you good for that role?
I think just because I've kind of been in leadership roles, like growing up, like I've always been like the main point guard on my team, like as a youth player, been a captain of quite a few different teams. So that was definitely a good like starting point, like in my pro career. But it's definitely like something that I've had to grow into in these 3 years I've had with Bristol in the BBL. Just because, like you said, the whole age thing, and we have like quite a lot of talented players that like come from the States, for example. So kind of the concept of me like earlier in my career than they are, younger than them, even like less skilled than some of the players, like having to lead them is like a weird, it's kind of back to front. But it's something that I've been like really like growing into this past 2 years really.
That's brilliant. And I believe you were picked up by England. I think, was it under 15 level?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, so that was like at the time I was like, wow, this is kind of like the pinnacle, like England. I just remember like everyone who plays for the national team starts off representing their region, and yeah, we didn't have the best region growing up. We often like lost to the other regions like quite frequently. So I knew my chances of making the England team were quite slim, like just based off that. And then the process when I had the trials, it was just a whole different world. Like everyone's playing at a different level. The physicality, like it felt like playing with like almost like men type thing. But yeah, just when I made that final team, it was just like the most satisfying feeling. Just felt on top of the world.
That's so cool. Who's got the best region, just out of interest?
The best regions are usually the Northwest. So you guys, yeah, Northwest, London, and then West Midlands. They're usually in the top 4 somewhere.
There you go. Wow. And then sort of aside from England, around that time, presumably that's the first time where you're starting to get first experience training with men's basketball with Bristol, is that right?
Yeah, so I started training like a couple years after the England stuff when I was in college. And it's quite cool because one of my current teammates now, I trained with him back in the day, like when I was like 17, 18. When like his first stint with the club, then he went away, came back in my second year. So it's kind of cool I had that connection with him. But yeah, that was like I said, like it's just another just crazy like eye-opener, like what pro basketball is like, seeing it like on a week-to-week basis, how these players really conduct themselves. And I think it was good to have that experience with those guys.
Do you change your approach to training as you started to sort of train with bigger and better players? Are you doing more work outside of the court, or are you doing any gym work, things like that?
Yeah, I think it just gave me a better idea of what to be working on. Because you know, I think one thing that's really good about basketball culture around the world is the kind of grind mentality and to be working on your game constantly, like daily. And I think the difference maker is like what you're working on. So kind of like being around those pros and just speaking to them and asking them questions, that kind of gave me some insight into like where I should be kind of leading my game, where I can find my edge and my advantage.
Is there any sort of top tip, like if one thing jumps out at you that you kind of took away from that?
Well, I would say for any point guard, just be able to have an impact on the game, because that's one position where you can't come in and things either get worse or things like look the same. You can kind of, I mean, debatably maybe like hide other positions, but as a point guard you need to have an impact. Like one thing that one of my kind of like, I guess you could say mentors, or kind of like my big bro, like Roy Owen, used to play for the Flyers. He said like, if you're not there for a practice or a game, people should be able to tell the difference. Like it shouldn't be like, oh yeah, I didn't know Corey's around today. It should be like, where's Corey, there's something missing type thing. So yeah, that's something I carry with me, and I would say that's a great starting point for any player. Yeah,
I think that pretty much goes for any team sport, doesn't it?
You
want to be that guy all the time.
Definitely.
Can you tell me about the EYBL?
Yeah, so that was my first well, I guess like my kind of second like lot of experiences in Europe. So I've kind of had 3 different European experiences. and that was like the first like elite one. So I was at college in Myerscough, which is like near Preston. That's kind of the closest big place I could kind of say.
Yeah, I come from near there. So
Oh yeah,
I know what you mean. It is pretty much in the middle of nowhere.
There's really not much there, but it's a cool college. Like some high level players have gone through that program, and we kind of entered into a competition of like some of the top clubs in Europe. Probably the most famous club, most known one would be Zalgiris, Lithuanian team. Who've even got a EuroLeague team,
right?
And I just remember like we beat them at maybe the second or third stage. We played like a lot of high level players and made it to the super final, which was a great experience in itself. And I think it's kind of preparing me for this season, where like with Flyers, we've been in Europe in a kind of a new European competition called the European North Basketball League. Where we've kind of, it's really similar format, and yeah, it's been kind of like the same thing where we've kind of been able to break records and make history for the club, making it to the playoffs and stuff.
I think people probably aren't quite aware like how big basketball is in Europe. Like, it is huge, isn't it? Like the crowds, like the attendances and things like that.
Yeah.
I imagine with that comes a lot more pressure. Is that something that you enjoy or something that you found difficult?
It's something I look forward to. I think like whenever as players we kind of, when we're younger or even now to be honest, whenever we're picturing like a game or where we want to be in our career, it's always with a big crowd. Like no one wants to play in an empty sports hall.
Of course. Yeah.
So I was even chatting to one of my teammates the other day, like that's something to like thrive off of and look forward to. I think it's harder when it's like a smaller crowd and then you kind of got to generate all that energy like just within your team. But yeah, it's definitely a cool experience.
And I think later on that year you went out to Italy to play for a team.
Yeah.
Was that like a pro contract situation? Were you going out there like for that reason?
Yeah. So originally like after college I wanted to get a scholarship to like university college in America. And then that didn't kind of work out for me. But my coach at the time, he set up the Italy thing. He got me in contact with an agent, and that was my first like pro basketball contract. And that was like a really good experience in itself. Met some really good teammates that I'm still in contact with to this day. And at the time it's like my whole career is like set. I know what I'm doing for the next 10 years. I'm gonna be overseas in Europe. It didn't like work out that way because of circumstances, but it was a great year I had over there.
Yeah, for anyone not connecting the dots, being in Italy in 2019, not ideal.
Yeah, definitely not.
So yeah, COVID hits. Obviously, that shuts the league down. There's no chance of playing. And then, do you have a decision to make of whether to stay and see what happens, or whether to come home and kind of, reassess?
So I think it's something a lot of overseas players can relate to at the time, where our managers and coaches were kind of telling us, "Oh, just stick it out, stay around. This COVID thing is gonna blow over in a couple weeks."
Yeah.
And at the time I was on the fence. I was like, it could do. They were like, nah, don't go home. And I guess from their perspective, they don't want players to go home and not be let back in, and they didn't see it being that bad. But I'm grateful that we just made the decision to just book flights as soon as possible, and then just take things from there. And then that next period of my life was I was kind of in no man's land. I didn't really know what direction to go in, didn't know if like I still had a future in basketball, because then Brexit like came right after COVID, which made finding contracts in Europe just like 10 times harder. That just kind of just sparked like a crazy chain of events.
What are the implications of that? So does that mean now that to get the visa that you need to actually go and play professionally, you have to jump through more hoops? Is it only like the top clubs that are allowed to? How does that work? Yeah,
so it's like one is the visa wise, it's way more expensive for teams. So that kind of like, I guess, discourages teams from recruiting English players. And then also it puts us in the same category as like import players from like outside of Europe, and obviously each team has a limited amount of players that they can sign from outside of Europe.
Makes sense.
Even though we're in Europe, but we're outside the EU, it just changes the categorization of the players. So then you're competing for like 2 or 3 spots rather than like 8 or 9 spots each year.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it kind of puts like British players in a dilemma where like within the UK there's like, I guess 10 paid teams, 10 pro teams in the BBL, maybe like 3 or 4 pro teams where they pay players in D1, and then outside of that it's like recreational,
amateur
amateur level. And then the other side of it is if you want to go overseas, like that's just way harder now. So yeah, it's a really difficult position to be in, but
that's tough. So you came back, rejoined Bristol Flyers?
Eventually, yeah.
Oh, okay,
there was a bit of a gap. I wasn't really sure where my next like opportunity was coming from. So just in the meantime, I took up a job working in a special needs school, which I was telling some of the guys at Sport for Champions earlier, that was quite like I think life changing, or at least life transitioning period. But what that allowed me to do was just work on my game, working at that school. After the school day was over, head to the sports school, just work on my game. And then I think in the summer of 2021, I reached out to my old coaches about getting involved in the team, and then just taking things like day by day, week by week, and then work myself onto the roster, and then it just took off from there.
There you go. It's difficult, isn't it? A lot of athletes had such a challenging time during COVID. Obviously unable to train, definitely unable to train with teammates and things like that. At any point did you consider maybe not going back into basketball?
I don't think it wasn't a consideration of it's time to quit. It was more just a thing of like, I don't know how it's gonna happen, but I'm very kind of like faith oriented. Like I was kind of like saying to the guys earlier, like I try and like walk with Christ every day. So it was just something I was praying on and just trusting God that an opportunity would come. So I was just training as if like an opportunity would come, and it came at the right time. So yeah, thank God for that. I was able to get my career back on track.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then so that you're now, that would be playing, is that so you've not actually had a huge amount of experience in men's basketball, but you've had a huge amount of time out, and then you're coming straight back into the top league in England. How did that work out?
Yeah, that was crazy, because like you said, I just had time. I hadn't played an actual game in over a year, and never at that level. So it's I think a lot of mental barriers of like, am I ready for this? Am I good enough for this? And to be completely honest, I wasn't really expecting to play much when I got that contract. And I just remember the first game of the season, it was funny because I was just expecting to ride the bench the whole game pretty much. Coach kept subbing me in. He subbed me in like early in the game. I was like, oh, what, me? I just came in, did my thing, came out, subbed me back in. And like every time I was subbing, I'd look over to my brother who was watching like courtside, and I was just like, bro, I don't know what's going on, but I'm just running with it type thing.
Nice.
But yeah, it was cool. I think the bigger kind of thing in my head wasn't so much like I haven't been here before, is more so I'm now like at the level that I kind of grew up watching. Because like coming up through the Flyers program as a junior, like the players at that time, I was like really looking up to those guys, and like to me those guys were like, they was it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then to now be like, now I'm in the jersey and I'm in their position, other side of the fence moment, is like, that was the biggest like thing to get my head around.
And then do you spend a lot of time, or do you have much interaction with the young kids coming through kind of the other side of that fence from you now?
Yeah, so we're quite lucky that like we train like on the same court for now. So like just in the little transition period, you can kind of like catch up with like some of the younger players, watch them practice a little bit. And then there's like the Bristol Sport Foundation, which is linked to our team. They've got quite a lot of different kind of hubs and different pockets of basketball sessions, and we get to go to their like holiday camps, or like some of their weekly trainings, make appearances and kind of even coach and stuff. So it's cool to be able to get involved in like the younger generations coming up. Yeah.
That's the only way, isn't it, to push the sport on, really, is to invest in the young people playing it, because as much as you do have kind of the older heads and people who've been across to America and stuff, if basketball is going to grow in the UK, you really need it to be taken up by the younger generation. Kind of brings me on to my next question. Can you tell me a bit about where you see the future for Bristol Flyers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've got quite a bright future. The direction of the club and kind of, I guess, the owners and everyone involved at the top level are quite aspirational. And, you know, I think just us being involved in a European competition throughout this season is just evidence that they're really trying to push the club forwards, get the players out there, get us playing at a higher level. And I just see it as something that's going to continue to go in that direction and just keep playing at high levels in Europe. Had a difficult season domestically this year, in part due to injury. But if you look at kind of the trend of like the last like 4 or 5 years, you can see that we're just we're actually on an incline. So it's quite positive.
A bit more broadly, how do you see the future of basketball in the UK? It is growing. You are starting to see, I think it's the number 2 quickest rising sport in the UK after women's football. So it is really pushing on. But where do you see it, perhaps with a bit more sort of on the ground knowledge?
That's a difficult question, because like no one can deny that the talent level is like increasing. You can't deny the interest is really like you said, it's really increasing. But I think it's just the challenge is making it more sustainable for pro athletes, like current like pros, like for one, and two, just making more opportunities for it to become a profession for a lot more players. Because there's like we kind of mentioned like earlier, with the number of professional teams, it's quite limiting. So I think there's definitely room to grow, which is like the good thing. And the BBL is doing quite a lot of things this year with the new CEO to try and make it as big as possible. So I think these next kind of 5-ish years will have like a pretty big impact on where it actually gets to. But I think it's in good hands. I hope it's in good hands.
Yeah, it looks like it's got a good platform, so we'll just have to see, I guess, won't we?
Yeah.
What does a typical day's training look like for you?
So yeah, it's a good question. For me, it looks a bit different than most of my teammates, because I'm still studying at uni. So for me, I could have like a 9 a.m. lecture, and then grab a snack, head to training. We usually meet in the morning, maybe around 10, 11, watch some film, either of our previous game or like an upcoming opponent. Then we'll get in the weight room, lift for about an hour, and then we have our team practice, and it kind of depends like how close we are to the game, how intense the practice is. If we played like 2 days ago, for example, let's say we had a game on a Saturday and today is Tuesday, and then we don't have a game till next Saturday, then Tuesday might be quite an intense practice. But the Friday, like the day before the next game, it'd probably be just walk through base, get a lot of shooting, either like partner shooting or like as a team we'll go through different kind of shooting routines and stuff. So yeah.
There you go. And then in terms of diet, nutrition, recovery, is that something that you take a lot of interest in?
Yeah, it's something that I'm trying to work on, something I'm definitely trying to like build into my daily routine. We've got quite a few guys on the team that take it seriously, which is like really good for me to learn from them. So like our captain, for example, I remember he challenged me at the start of the season to go 2 months with no sweets, no fast food, no sweet drinks other than water. And at the end of it, I got a pair of shoes, which is obviously a great incentive. That's but I'm glad he did that for me, because you know it kind of showed me that I can like go about those things. I don't have to like go to those like easy, it's just quick dopamine is all it is really.
Awesome.
So yeah, since then I'm able to like build like better habits.
Do you feel like that helped your performance when you did that?
Yeah, I think the biggest help was the hydration. It kind of just showed me like, what am I like really drinking? What am I really putting in my body? Like usually, because once going through that period, like I was just drinking like way more frequently, but obviously having water over juice, like you just feel way more refreshed and like alert, and you can last a lot longer playing, less cramping. So yeah, the hydration like helped a lot.
There you go. And then in terms of, we've covered quite a lot in the podcast, but if you had a piece of advice for a young person out there, maybe thinking of a career in sport, or maybe someone who's thinking of really throwing themselves into basketball, what would it be?
I think the most, I guess, usable piece of advice, if that's a word, would just be to outwork everyone that's like around you, but even the people like on the other side of the world, like you're still competing with them, because in 10 years when you're in your 20s, the market kind of expands and you're not just competing with people in your area. It's like you could be competing with anybody, but then outside of sport, like alongside that, whatever your other interests are, I would say like really work on those. Academically, just make sure you give yourself the best chance and really value those things, because even if you don't value it at that time, it can be something, as I've come to realize, that you like those qualifications come back to really help you in the future. And it's just good to be well-rounded and just give yourself as many options in life as possible.
It's so important, isn't it? A lot of people, they're just totally tunnel vision on the sport, but obviously it's a short career, and if you're not a well-rounded person, people can really struggle then going into the real world. What is it you're studying at uni?
So I study business and HR management, and kind of linking back to my experience as a teaching assistant at the school in lockdown. That kind of like, I guess, that degree choice kind of like has roots in that experience there. That's where I learned quite a lot about myself. So even that, I would say get as many experiences as you can, like growing up, doing different things. So then when it comes time to like make decisions, you actually got something to base them off of. And that can actually guide you. Because like right now I'm interested in quite a few different things, but when I was like, even as old as like 19, 20, the only thing I had going on in my head was basketball. I couldn't really care less about anything else, and obviously that's not the best way to be. So yeah, well, I think that's really good advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Nah, it's been great to be on, man.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone joining us at home. We'll see you next time. Cheers.